Welcome. My name is Colleen Allen. I am the Vice President of Sisters Network Incorporated. We are so excited to have you here today. We thank you, first of all, for taking time out of your busy schedules to be here, to invest in your own health and to learn more about clinical trials. And today, as part of our Sisters Network Patient Education and Empowerment webinar series, we are talking about advancing clinical trials with Black women, because as we know, representation really does matter. And we need to talk about why do Black women continue to be underrepresented in clinical trials? We want to learn more about the importance of clinical trials and to find out how to participate and the benefits. Shortly you'll be hearing from Dr. Nan Chen, who is with the University of Chicago Medicine Comprehensive Cancer Center. I'll be introducing her in a moment, but before we get started, I'd like to just say thank you to our sponsors who help power our webinar series. And today's webinar series is powered by Tahio Oncology and Seagen, and we are so grateful for their support, for their partnership with Sisters Network, and to help us bring this important information to the community. So before we get started, I'd like to just tell a little bit about Sisters Network Incorporated, because we may have some new folks on today who don't know much about the organization. Sisters Network is headquartered in Houston, Texas. We are the only national Black breast cancer organization in the country. We have we have 30 chapters around the country, and each of our chapters are survivor run. We have been around for nearly 3 decades, as I said, and here's a sampling of our chapters that are out there doing the work, and we'll be highlighting some of them. I'm sure some of them have taken time to be on today, and we'll give them a shout out shortly. But it's important that we have the boots on the ground. Unlike some other organizations, we have those chapters, those ladies who are working tirelessly in their respective community to bring good programming, informative programming, empowerment, and most importantly, sisterhood to support the ladies in their respective communities. So I thank our chapters from all across the country. And if you're interested in starting a Sisters Network chapter, just go on our website, sistersnetworkinc.org, click under chapters, and there will be information on how that process begins. But we welcome you all today. Again, my name is Colleen Allen. I am the Vice President of Sisters Network Incorporated. And before we get started, I'm going to have Mrs. Karen E. Jackson, who is the founder and CEO of Sisters Network, to bring some just brief welcome greetings. Mrs. Jackson.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you, Colleen. She has been doing such a wonderful job. I'm very excited to be here today. I'm not going to be actually a panelist, shame, but I am happy to say welcome, enjoy what we're offering today, and know that we are presenting the best of what is available on this subject. And we hope that this will increase the number of women to participate in the clinical trials. It is so important for us as women now to take charge of our health and participate in what is offered and what will work for all of us. So everyone sit back, enjoy. Dr. Chen is wonderful. So good afternoon and enjoy. You're muted.
Sorry about that. Thank you, Mrs. Jackson. Again, we welcome you to Advancing Clinical Trials with Black Women. Today, we have a wonderful medical expert that we met in Chicago, and her name is Dr. Nan Chen. She is the Associate Professor of Medicine and Comprehensive Cancer Research in the Comprehensive Cancer Research Center, University of Chicago Medicine Comprehensive Cancer Center. Dr. Chen is a breast medical oncologist at the University of Chicago, focused on improving patient outcomes with breast cancer. Her research interests include identifying new treatments for both early and advanced breast cancer and identifying new biomarkers to predict response to treatment. She is very active in clinical research and runs a number of trials evaluating new treatments for different types of breast cancer. Dr. Chen joined the faculty at the University of Chicago in 2021 and is currently an assistant professor of internal medicine. She received her MD at New York Medical College and completed her medical training in internal medicine and oncology at Baylor College of Medicine. And I always tell her, We're so excited that she came to Baylor College of Medicine because we're based in Houston. Let's give a warm welcome to Dr. Nan Chen, who will be doing a wonderful presentation and will be taking questions during our Q&A session. Dr. Chen, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Colleen, Mrs. Jackson, and the entire Sisters Network for having me to discuss this really important topic. I hope that we'll have an informative discussion. Please ask me questions. I'd love to speak to you guys about this really important topic. And so we're going to be talking today all about clinical trials, why they're important, how to get involved, and why it's especially important for Black women. So the FDA is the Food and Drug Administration. This is the government agency that regulates all of the prescription medications in the United States. All of the drugs that we use today, we first had to show that they work better than what we used to have, or that they work if we never had drugs doing that they work at all. There are some drugs that we developed many years ago and we're still using them. And there are other drugs that we maybe only used for a few years before we found better things. And so what do we mean when we say that a drug is FDA approved? It means that it had to pass a series of tests to demonstrate why we should be giving this to everybody in certain situations with cancers. And so what are these tests and how did drugs get here? So clinical trials are how we study new treatments to see if they are better than what we're currently using. All drugs have to go through this process to become available to everybody. And a clinical trial offers patients the first chance to try a new treatment and potentially benefit from it. So, and in addition to this, learning whether a new drug is better than standard treatment can also help others. And findings from clinical trials determine whether or not new treatments will become the standard of care. So the earliest phase of trials is phase 1, and this really focuses on the safety of new treatments and finding the appropriate dose. And this usually involves about 15 to 50 patients. And what this means is that even before we look at whether drugs are effective, we want to make sure they are safe, because if they're not safe, then it doesn't matter much if they work well or not. Following up on this, if drugs are successful, then phase 2 trials will focus on the effectiveness of treatments, as well as looking again at the side effects. And this typically involves about 100 patients. If drugs pass this stage, then phase 3 trials will typically compare this new treatment to what we are currently using. And studies like this typically involve hundreds of patients. And then if these drugs are successful, if these trials are successful, then the drug becomes available for everybody. And phase 4 trials will just observe patients when they're taking the drugs out in the community. And we have clinical trials for in all of these phases for nearly all situations and types of breast cancer. The first type of treatment I'll discuss is when we would give therapy before surgery. And in some patients, we will recommend this to reduce the amount of cancer. And there are many clinical trials in this area studying alternative options to see if they would be better. And there are a few goals for the new treatments that we're developing in this space, including increasing the likelihood that we can significantly reduce or completely eradicate all cancer cells by the time of surgery, or finding treatments that have less toxicity and side effects than what we're currently using. And also finding treatments that may work in patients where the usual things we're trying are not very effective. Similarly, after surgery, depending on each patient's response, we may want to adjust how we give medicine afterwards. And the reason why is because despite what we're currently doing, unfortunately, some women's cancer is still coming back. And so studies in this area are primarily done with the goal of decreasing the risk of a patient's cancer returning, and then to also match the appropriate level of treatment for each cancer patient's risk. Some patients may not need additional treatment, and we don't want to give them additional medicine if it doesn't improve outcomes. And so they're also studying to see if we can give less treatment to women with lower risk disease. And so there are many studies in this area trying to kind of find the ideal treatment for each individual patient. And certainly for patients with metastatic breast cancer in 2022, unfortunately, the majority of these women will not have a cure for this disease. But we know that there are recent breakthroughs that have increased the therapies we know are effective and allowed women to live longer. The goals of research in metastatic breast cancer are, of course, to find treatments that are more effective than our current drugs that can extend a patient's life, but also to find treatments that have less toxicity and side effects, and especially ones that may reduce our usage of chemotherapy, which we know can be very toxic and difficult to tolerate. So why should women with breast cancer, and especially Black women with breast cancer, should they participate in clinical trials? So this is a graph showing mortality rate per 100,000 women that on the left starts out in the early 90s and then takes us all the way to 2014. Unfortunately, as you can see by the black line, Black women have consistently passed away from their disease at a higher rate than white women. But even more horrifying, this gap between the mortality rates is increasing. So what does this mean is happening between 1990 and 2014? It's that while medical advances have improved the mortality for both groups of women, it's working a little better for white women than it is for Black women. Racial and ethnic diversity in breast cancer clinical trials will help researchers understand the effects of socioeconomic disparities, gaps in healthcare access, genetic differences, and other factors that may account for negative breast cancer outcomes among Black women. Certain treatments for breast cancer may also affect Black women differently, and improving diversity in trials will help scientists understand these differences and ensure that treatments are safe and effective for everyone. And lastly, clinical trials can also give Black women access to cutting-edge treatments that they may not be able to receive elsewhere. So how are we doing in terms of Black women participating in clinical trials? As it turns out, we are not doing very well. This paper looked at phase 3 trials, so those big trials with hundreds and hundreds of women that determine whether drugs make it to market or not, that were conducted in breast cancer from 2008 to 2018. And Black patients are represented by the tan color. And as you can see, while the incidence or the number of breast cancer cases is a specific amount, the mortality or the death from cancer is much greater relative to other races. And even worse, if you look at enrollment into clinical trials, which is that third row, it is significantly lower than both the incidence and especially the mortality. And so the women who need the most help and the women who need the most and most cutting edge medical treatments are not getting enrolled into our clinical trials. This is a similar study that looked at breast cancer trials that were done for oral drugs that got FDA approval from 2009 to 2019. And we can again see really discouragingly that only 2.4% of patients in that little green sliver right there of patients that were enrolled to these trials were Black. And we've already talked about how important it is for Black women to be more representative of the actual women who are getting cancer in this country. And so what are some barriers to clinical trials that we have noticed? This is something that we are studying just the way that we are studying new drugs. We're studying why are we not having enough Black women participate? And so in 2022, so just earlier this year, a survey was sent out to patients with metastatic breast cancer, and out of over 400 responses, about a quarter of them were from Black patients. And this survey noticed that Black patients were less likely to have discussed clinical trials with their oncologist. Black patients were more likely to have concerns about the safety of the study that their oncologist didn't adequately address. And Black women were more likely to value receiving information about the trial from someone of their own race. And so this leads to, I think I would like to have a discussion about some of the barriers that we have to clinical trials. So one thing is that, there are a lack of referrals. Not all oncologists everywhere have access to clinical trials. So if they don't place referrals to places that have more clinical trials, then patients might not know about all the potential options. Secondly, there is medical distrust. The medical community needs to do better with community outreach and patient advocacy to help bridge this gap. And third, some studies will have strict eligibility criteria. So every study has rules about which patients can go on and which patients can't. And this can be based on many things, such as tumor characteristics and medical history. And these rules are in place to make sure that we have a similar group of women so that the results of the study can be interpreted correctly. But sometimes these rules may limit the groups of patients that can participate. And we need to be careful to make sure that these rules are not unfairly not allowing Black women to participate. And lastly, there are financial barriers. Participating in these studies sometimes may mean making more frequent trips to the clinic, and this can quickly add up. And financial toxicity is a big area of research currently, as we realize how important and how relevant this is to our patients. And so what can we do to overcome some of these barriers? It is important for clinical trial researchers and referring clinicians to develop a good rapport with the people they serve, especially with Black women. They should let diverse community members know about clinical trials without assuming certain groups won't be interested. Targeted training can also help researchers and clinicians recognize not only the importance of diversity in clinical trials and to understand their own biases, but to better communicate effectively with diverse community members. We need to better engage with patient advocates, support groups, faith-based organizations, and other community groups and outreach efforts that are already on the ground, such as Sisters Network, that may also raise awareness and increase enrollment in clinical trials among Black women. As I said, Black women reported in the survey that they appreciate having someone of their own race be there to talk about this information. And so increasing diversity among cancer researchers and healthcare professionals is very important. We need to do more to promote Black healthcare providers. We need to do more to promote more Black women getting into the healthcare force. And lastly, we know we have to reduce financial barriers. We need to provide more flexible appointment times that work around women's lives. We need to provide parking vouchers and other forms of better transportation. And we need to provide help for the family as well, because this is not just about the patient, this is about their family. And finally, we need to provide clinical trial information in multiple languages and provide other practical measures to help improve Black participation. Since the beginning of the presentation, we've kind of talked about a specific type of clinical trial, which involves trying new medicines. But I just wanted to bring up that there is a lot of other clinical research that's being done that doesn't necessarily involve a new therapy. And that's because while we have many options of treatment that are currently available, we still can't tell how well each patient will do with our therapies and which patient might not do so well. If we had that information, then it might help us decide which patients to offer which treatments. And we need to learn more about how breast cancers operate and kind of how they change over time. And so to this end, we are able to collect blood samples, tumor samples, and even stool samples to give us a glimpse into how cancers act in the body and interact with our immune system. And while these types of studies won't have any personal benefits for the patients that participate, this information can help us better treat breast cancer in the future, especially for Black women. There are also many other areas of research that are important in our patients' lives, a little bit of which I kind of touched on. For example, fertility and sexual health is an important aspect of our patients' lives that we are not spending enough time discussing and not researching enough. There are many long-term side effects that patients can experience after a cancer diagnosis, after receiving chemotherapy, and it may be different in white women and Black women, and this is an area we need to further discuss. The impact of breast cancer treatment on emotional well-being and mental health is also important. And I mentioned before, but cancer treatment is really expensive, and many women experience financial toxicity from treatments, in addition to the physical toxicity that they get from our treatments. And we are studying how this impacts our patient care. Diet and exercise play an important role in our patients' lives. And lastly, as many breast cancers are related to inherited mutations, we need to get a better understanding of how we can treat breast cancer in families as an area of research. So for example, even in patients who've never been diagnosed with breast cancer, are there better ways that we can look for breast cancer in these patients so we can find them even earlier than we currently are? And there's a lot of research currently going on in that area. So the best way, I think, to find out if a clinical trial is correct for you is by being your own advocate and speaking to your oncologist. There are many questions that you can ask to get information about potential trials, such as, is there a clinical trial that you can suggest for me? And where can I find additional information about this trial? In deciding whether or not to pursue a trial, helpful questions to ask can include, how often will I have to be seen? What are the side effects I may experience on this trial? And does this trial include a placebo? Will I get one? And what costs are covered by the trial? I did want to include some resources that can help people look out for clinical trials that may be appropriate. Clinicaltrials.gov is a federal database of all clinical trials that are available. And then Breast Cancer Trials is another nonprofit database that collects a lot of this information. And you can enter some search parameters and it'll help populate some trials that may be appropriate for you. And they will include information about the study, including new therapies they are testing, as well as where the study is being conducted. It might be that the oncologist you're seeing doesn't have the study, but maybe an oncologist, half an hour down the road does. And then, of course, lastly, again, your oncologist should be a really good resource in these situations. And I hope that everyone can find an oncologist they trust and are comfortable discussing these issues with them. That's really all I had. Thank you again to Colleen, Mrs. Jackson, and Sisters Network for having me. And I'm really, really excited to talk to everybody and answer questions.
Thank you, Dr. Chen. I think I'll kick off with a question or two. And again, please put your questions in the chat or in the Q&A area, and we will present them to Dr. Chen, because we really want you to have that dialogue while you have a chance with an esteemed medical expert of her caliber. Walk us through the process in terms of, once I decide, okay, I'm going to be involved in this trial, what does that look like for that individual?
Yeah, so
I know each of them are different, so.
Yeah, there are definitely some general things to expect. And so the absolute first thing that happens when you decide to participate is you sign a consent. The consent is usually a very long document, and we want it to be long to kind of explain everything we want to explain in a paper that you can take home. You can discuss it with your family. You can ask other people. A nurse or your physician or someone will go through the document with you, make sure you fully understand everything that is expected, including the risks as well as the benefits of participating in the trial. And then once we have your signature, typically what will happen is we might start to run a few different tests just to make sure that you are eligible. I spoke a little bit about those rules that every study has. And some of those rules are, oh, you must have a specific type of breast cancer, which we probably already know. But some of the other rules are, oh, we want to make sure that her liver numbers are a certain number. And so we'll have to check those tests to kind of see. There's usually research nurses or coordinators that are really helpful to answer all of those questions. We know that for many patients participating in clinical trials, it's your first one, and there's a lot of questions and a lot of new things that are a little bit different than your regular care. And so there are a lot of people there that can be resources to help you. Once you get through that process and everything kind of checks all the boxes, then you will start the clinical trial. I would say the vast majority of patients on a clinical trial, the way that you'll receive your treatment will likely feel a lot like you getting your regular treatment. You would go to the same place, you would see the same nurses, and the amount of time you'll stay there is pretty regular as well. And so once you're kind of on the treatment, all of those things will likely be pretty routine to what you're used to experiencing.
Okay, so we're starting to have some questions come in, and they're actually very good. And thank you, ladies, for submitting them. We'll get to them all as quickly as we can. The first one is from Ms. Frazier. She says, how can we get better knowledge to both PCPs and specialists about existing or upcoming clinical trials? Seemingly, with all the ways to connect with patients today, there should be opportunities to reach patients and Black women. When I participated in a BRCA2 research study, it was my hematologist who approached me, and they expressed surprise when I agreed. It was so beneficial. So what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, hi, Ms. Frazier. Thank you so much for that question. And it's a really good question because it is something the medical community is really struggling with as well. I think that when we have studies, obviously we want it to reach as wide of a group of women as we can. But even we struggle with making sure that all of our physicians are aware of this. I absolutely agree with you. I think it's so important that as many people as we can, are aware of the study and are aware of the patients that may benefit. I guess I would say, certainly from the University of Chicago, we try to advertise the studies that we have on Twitter and social media. I think that's one of the fantastic things that's happened is that, we've become a much more technologically connected group. But also, I think that we need to make more connections and inroads with the community. I'm really glad that your hematologist brought up this study, but I think that we need to better engage with patient advocates, community groups like Sisters Network, and really empower patients themselves to look out for things that may be relevant to them.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Chen.
Yeah.
Again, we're talking about advancing clinical trials with Black women. Dr. Chen is our medical expert, and this afternoon is powered by Tahoe Oncology and CGen. Here's another question from Stephanie Brown. She says, are there a lot of trials geared toward patients with metastatic breast cancer?
Hi, Ms. Brown. Thank you for that question. There are a lot of trials geared towards treating patients with metastatic breast cancer. That is probably one of the areas where there's, more trials than I can name. I think I'm not exaggerating to say there's almost certainly over 100 trials for very specific things. But as you can imagine, I would say the majority of these trials aren't for everybody. So many of these trials are specifically for ER positive, HER2 negative, or triple negative, or things like that. But this is a very, very, very active area of research. I think it is a goal of many cancer researchers to try to find a cure for metastatic breast cancer in any way, or if we can find better treatments for metastatic breast cancer. But this is a very, very active area of research. Absolutely.
D. Liz asks, are there clinical trials for DCIS stage 0?
Hi, Ms. Liz, there absolutely are. So, just how Ms. Fraser mentioned that there was trials for BRCA women, there are trials for women who don't even have breast cancer, but who may be at higher risk for breast cancer. And there are trials for DCIS, for early stage and metastatic breast cancer. I think one of the biggest areas of DCIS that we don't totally understand yet is that some DCISs can turn into cancer and some DCISs won't. And currently we're treating DCIS kind of all of the same, but if we had a better understanding of which ones are more likely to turn into cancer and which ones are more likely to stay there and never bother the woman, then maybe we can be better treating our patients and not doing the same thing for everybody. And so I think that this is a really active area in DCIS research, but absolutely there's a lot of stuff we do for DCIS as well.
Okay, we have one of our chapter presidents, and if any of our chapters are online, I'd love you to put in the chat that you're in the house. We'd love to give you a shout out. But we'll start with our Vice President, Judith Hines, who is with the Sisters Network New York chapter. Thank you, Ms. Hines, for being here. Dr. Chen, do you recommend families to go to therapy for chemotherapy? Thank you for being on the panel. I'm not sure if I understand that.
Hi, Ms. Hines. It's always nice to see a fellow New Yorker as well. So I guess my interpretation of your question is, do I think it's helpful for even families to have psychosocial support as their family members going through chemo? Chemotherapy and cancer treatment does not just affect the patient. It affects the entire family. It affects the community that the patient is a part of. Cancer can be a really devastating event in patients' lives. And even with patients with early stage breast cancer, just receiving the diagnosis can be really, really difficult for the patient and the family. So I am a big proponent of therapy for the patient, for the family. Any type of support that the family might need, I think is a good idea. I'll also add in that I always think it's a good idea for family members to come with patients to at least their first appointment and even, subsequent ones. We give a lot of information during appointments, and I think it is impossible to expect anyone to even remember most of what I say. I will oftentimes, if patients come by themselves, ask if there's someone that I can call, just so even someone's on the phone to help listen in, because, you know, a lot of times families will be like, oh, what did your doctor say? And I said truly so many things. And so I always think it's helpful for family to be there, and, you know, caregivers and family go through it just as much as the patient does. So I definitely think support for everyone is really important.
Thank you. Just let's see. So we have Felicia Williams. She actually has two questions. She has a comment and a question. She says, I'm a breast cancer survivor and would like to get involved in a trial in the Atlanta area. Are there any available? And then their follow-up is, what other medicine is available besides tamoxifen?
Hi, Ms. Williams. So, you know, I think in terms of what kind of trials are available, I think it's difficult for me to be able to provide an exact answer because, again, there are so many different clinical trials. I'd have to know a little bit more about your like situation to see. I think if you wanted to send a few details over to Colleen, if you'd like to communicate, I'm more than happy to look into it for you. Or otherwise, as I said, if you're following with an oncologist, I think they should be a really great resource. And it's a really great question to say, hey, I'm a breast cancer survivor. You have all my medical details. Are there any clinical trials that are there for me? I forgot what the second question was. I'm sorry.
The follow-up question is, what other medicine is available besides tamoxifen?
That's right. So tamoxifen is a type of endocrine therapy that we give to women with ER-positive breast cancer as well as DCIS. Depending, again, on your situation, there may be different medications that you can use. I think the most common other one that we typically use is a family of medicines called aromatase inhibitors. And again, I'm happy to talk to you a little bit more about the specifics of your question. If you wanted to maybe shoot Colleen an email, I'm more than happy to email with you. I think there's a little bit more to the question, but I don't want to say anything because I don't know the specifics, but I'm more than happy to chat with you about it later.
Thank you. Okay. The next one, oh, she says she's ER positive, just FYI.
Okay, yeah.
So again, you can follow up with us.
Yes, please do.
We have Robin Sawyer. So she says, should you be in actual treatment in order to participate in clinical trials, or are individuals with a history of breast cancer good clinical trial participants? That's an excellent question.
That is an excellent question, Ms. Sawyer. So I think, again, there's many different types of clinical trials. So if you're no longer receiving any treatment, there are even clinical trials saying, well, maybe if we extend treatment, or even for breast cancer survivors, you know, after surgery or even many years out, are there additional medicines or different medicines that may work better? And so depending on your situation, that type of trial may be appropriate for you. And secondly, you know, I think in one of my last slides, I kind of discussed how financial toxicity, psychosocial health, mental health, you know, long-term side effects, all of those are clinical studies that we actually are looking for breast cancer survivors specifically. And so I think that there are a lot of opportunities to participate even as a breast cancer survivor. And I actively encourage you, because for some of these studies, that's actually the patient population that we're targeting. I think you're muted, Colleen.
I was answering something else. Just a shout out to Alice Norris, who's with our Chicago chapter. She's in the house. So thank you, Ms. Norris, for being on the webinar today. So our next question is from Sharon King. And she asked, thank you all for this amazing event. I'm an ambassador advocate in Ohio for Susan G. Komen and a 1-year survivor. I'm constantly sharing information within my community churches, breast cancer fundraising, like tomorrow, a golf tournament, dinner, however. I have no central depository for literature. Where can I get literature? I'm assuming she's asking for like trials.
Yeah, so, well, first of all, congratulations for being a 1-year cancer survivor. That's just absolutely fantastic. There are a lot of resources for patients. So a couple places I recommend is actually, so Susan G. Komen has its website, and there's a section that even has information for patients that you can access and maybe print out some documents. The second thing is that actually the National Cancer Institute, so cancer.gov, actually has really good information, you know, similarly about, you know, breast cancer and things like that. I don't know if there's a really fantastic resource looking at specifically cancer in Black women typically there are certain journal articles and there are places which I, looked at, but I don't know if there's any kind of central repository of that info, unfortunately. Yeah, I was going to say, I'm sure Mrs. Jackson has done her research looking for it. Unfortunately, that doesn't exist, which is a real, learning point there.
Our next question is from an anonymous attendee, but she asked, what about clinical trials? What about clinical trials about prevention of breast cancer, lifestyle trials?
Yeah, so I think, I talked about how diet and exercise and all of those things are also really important. I think that there are many trials for women who we kind of consider higher risk of breast cancer. For example, maybe that means a family member has it, or, there are other reasons. There are trials looking at, how diet and how exercise and how lifestyle choices interplay. And in addition, there are also trials looking at, is mammogram the best way to do that? Are there better ways to do mammograms? Are there other ways of screening for these patients? And so I do think that there are a lot of opportunities in this space as well. Yes.
Okay, and from one of your medical colleagues, we have Dr. Karanita Ojimo. I hope I didn't pronounce it incorrectly, but she's a radiation oncologist. She says to you, Dr. Chen, our patients are not scientists. Would it be better to describe it as clinical options versus trials? The word trial conveys the physician does not know what they are doing. I think we as physicians need to speak in a language that our patients understand and gain trust.
Yeah, Dr. Ojimo, I think that's a really fair point. I 100% agree that the words that we use and the way that we speak to patients is really important. And we definitely want to make sure that the message we are conveying is accurate and is actually describing what we're trying to say. And I also agree with you that they may be more accurately described as clinical options. I guess, one of the first things that I do want to make sure patients understand is that there is some level of the unknown with this. We don't know if these treatments do work as well as something else. And, I'm sure you're aware as well that for every positive study we have 5 negative studies of things that we thought would work and didn't turn out to be. And so I do want to make it clear to patients that these, that there are some unknowns with this, that this may not work as well as the treatment we're currently using. But I agree that clinical option may be a better way to describe, what trials actually do.
Okay, we have another attendee who asked, she says, hi, my name is Ronell Moore. Are there any clinical trials for triple negative?
Oh, Ms. Moore, there are so many trials for triple negative breast cancer. I think, because it is the most aggressive type of breast cancer, because the majority of our treatments for triple negative breast cancer is still chemo, it is such an active area of research. I could talk, and I did talk, at length about this specifically. It really is an area that we are seeing lots of improvements, but so much more needs to be done. So this is very, very active.
Okay, and then we have Carlita McEllen. I hope I said it right. How should you approach a clinician that states a patient is too weak to participate instead of letting them make a medical decision for themselves, especially when there is no qualification regarding strength or bandwidth? It's interesting.
Hi, Ms. McEllen. So that is definitely a tough situation. So I think that overall, we want treatments to make patients feel better, stronger, and not worse and weaker. I think that sometimes if patients aren't doing very well and maybe very weak, it may be that a clinical trial is not the best option, because these again are drugs that we don't have all of the information that we do for drugs that we again standard of care typically offer. And so we part of the reason why that is very important to clinicians as we're deciding whether or not to offer a clinical trial or whether patients would be a good candidate is because we want to avoid, again, a lot of toxicity. Maybe people have told you, we certainly don't want someone who's already sick to then receive a drug where it could make them even sicker. On the other hand, I do think that your physician, and any physician, myself included, should be doing everything they can to make the patient stronger, right? So why is the patient feeling weak? It's possible that the patient is feeling weak because they're on a current treatment that's making them feel weak, in which case actually doing a clinical trial is a wonderful option because it allows them to receive something else that's different than what they're currently getting. But, you know, if there are other situations where that might not be the case, and then it can get a little bit more complicated. I definitely think working closely with your oncologist, and you can ask them specific questions. Say, when you say, you know, this person is weak, what do you mean by that? Are there things that I can do to make them stronger? Do you think that this may be an option in 3 months when they get stronger? I think those are all very reasonable questions to ask your oncologist to see kind of how that might work.
Just a quick acknowledgement. We have a few chapters where we have some folks bringing greetings on behalf of their chapter. We have Carla Baptiste, who is a 15-year metastatic survivor. This October, she's bringing greetings from the Dallas chapter. We love our Dallas chapter. And we have Southwest Georgia, Monique Wilson, who is another 6-year survivor and a wonderful, one of our newer chapter members, and we really appreciate all the work she's doing. We have Regina Hall, who's from Central Virginia, one of our veteran chapters, who does a lot of great work out in that area. And of course, we said New York City with Judith Hines, who is our vice president of that chapter. The Triangle chapter, which is in the Durham, Raleigh-Durham area, Barbara Robinson is bringing greetings on behalf of that chapter. So we thank these ladies for the hard work that they do in representing Sisters Network Incorporated. And again, they are what makes Sisters Network Incorporated. I think we've got some great questions, so I don't want to lose the momentum. And this is a really good one right here. Ms. Fraser's come back and she says, is there any current federal or local legislation that advocates for patients who are participating in trials and have to miss time for work? And then just quickly, Carol Coram came back with a comment. She says, there is a bill in Congress that needs co-sponsorship in the Senate. It's the Diverse Clinical Trials Act. It aims to erase the barriers mentioned in this webinar. Funds would be provided to cover non-medical costs of participation. I suggest folks look up their senators to see if they're on board. I just got back from DC lobbying for this. So thank you, ladies, both for bringing the question and for quickly responding with the information. And if you want to make a comment, Dr. Chen, please feel free.
I just want to say thank you so much for all of our patient advocates, especially those that work on legislation. For better or worse, I think one of the most effective ways to get things done is through our government, both at the, or not both, but just at the federal, state, and local level. I think that those types of legislations are targeted towards reducing the financial toxicity, which we know that patients experience and can increase on clinical trials, because again, it might require a few more visits or a little bit more time than regular treatment. I do think even locally at your cancer center, there may be funds to help support this. I know at the University of Chicago, we are able to provide transportation and buses and taxi vouchers and parking vouchers and all of those things. Additionally, many companies that sponsor the trials, like pharmaceutical companies using their drugs, will have that type of sponsorship as well. We definitely do not want that to be a source of stress for patients, and we don't want that to be a reason that they don't receive good care.
Okay. So we do have a couple. We have Juanita Moody, who is involved. She plans to get more involved with our Detroit chapter. We welcome that. And we have our Greensboro chapter who's in the house, Ms. Williams, who's bringing greetings on behalf of that chapter, and as well as Sandra Love, who's bringing greetings on behalf of our Austin chapter. So we always like to make sure we take a moment to acknowledge these ladies. Let's go. We have about 10 minutes left. So we want to try to kind of go through these questions as quickly as we can so that we can, acknowledge you all. Let's see. So we have, I would like to know, this is from an anonymous attendee. I would like to know, is there any other medications out there besides infusion? I have been through breast cancer 3 times. This is my 3rd time, and I was told breast cancer trials are only for people that have no other options. My oncologist shut me down about it. But I have now been put on Keytruda along with my chemo.
Yeah, I think I'm really, really sorry that your oncologist said that, because I think that I would disagree with that statement. I think that clinical trials sometimes can be used when there are no other options. But I think I oftentimes will say, clinical trials are in tandem with other options that we have. And I would actually encourage the use of clinical trials earlier in your treatment, because, patients like yourself who have been on infusions for a very, very long time, it's a very difficult journey. Absolutely. I think, again, without knowing a little bit more about kind of what's going on with your cancer specifically and some of the medical details, it's a little difficult for me to make specific recommendations. But if you, again, want to send an email to Colleen, I'm more than happy to speak further to this and your specific issues. I'm more than happy to speak further to this offline. But clinical trials are absolutely not only meant for women without any other options. They're meant to be used in tandem with the treatment that we already have to extend a woman's life, to find better treatment options, to decrease toxicity and all of that. And I'm sorry that your oncologist gave you that impression, because I don't think that that's true.
Okay. Dr. Chen, our president of the Dallas chapter, Zolene Bruner, who's a 20-year survivor, just says, thanks, Dr. Chen, for all this great information.
Oh my goodness. Congratulations, Ms. Brewer, on your 20 years. That's fantastic.
Let's see. So we have Morgan Dawkins, who says, how do you talk to patients of color regarding clinical trials? How do you introduce the concept to these patients, those who have valid and just concerns about research, when there has been a history of unethical practices? And that is a very fair question.
That is a very fair question. It is a question that I and many of my colleagues think about, because be able to address Black women's concerns about this comprehensively. So the first thing that I typically tell patients is that participating in clinical trials is entirely voluntary, and that your care will absolutely not be affected by your decision of whether to participate. The second thing that I try to emphasize is that the very most important thing we care about is actually safety. And that's built into the way that we even conduct our clinical trials. Phase 1 clinical trials have to have a safety evaluation, meaning that that's the very first thing we look at. It's not even how well the medicine works, it's whether it's safe or not. And so the most important thing is that it's safe. And the other thing I will say is that I have to acknowledge, as a non-Black woman, that I do not share the same experiences as you, and I will not pretend to or even imagine to, and that I have limitations in my experience, and that, certainly I want to develop a relationship built on trust and mutual respect, but that there are many experiences that you've had that I cannot relate to. There are other members of my healthcare team that may be able to better relate to those experiences, that look like you, that, maybe even in the community that you are. And so I sometimes, might ask them to kind of help me bridge that gap. But I certainly think that having a trusting, respectful relationship with your oncologist, and that very much goes both ways. It doesn't mean that you respect your doctor and it doesn't go the other way. It means absolutely both ways. I think that is really the foundation and the cornerstone of doing a clinical trial and trying to alleviate, at least even on that small level, some of the injustices that have happened in the past.
Okay, I actually overlooked this question, and I think it's a really good one that we need to come back to. It says, it's from Monisha Rosby, Brasport area alumni chapter. I'm thinking she's Delta Sigma Theta Incorporated. Are there opportunities to work with high school teachers and students for research? I thought that was interesting.
So Ms. Rosby, I guess maybe, do you mean like in terms of them helping with research, or I guess like what context would there be? I certainly think that most institutions have programs where they want to recruit high school students to kind of come see what we do, see if medicine's for you. Again, I mentioned that making sure we have a diverse healthcare force is super, super important to helping increase Black participation in clinical trials. So in that sense, we do certainly work with high school students. I guess if high school students wanted to also kind of work with us on research, to kind of be part of the research team, we also have opportunities for that. But if you meant something different, then please, send another message or email Colleen. I'll be sure to try to address that again.
Okay. This person is anonymous. It says, 49 days ago, I had breast cancer surgery. The oncologist said, because of my kind of cancer, I wouldn't need chemo or radiation. I'm on
Anastrozole?
Thank you. For the next 5 years. Are there any clinical trials for someone like myself?
There probably are, again, without knowing kind of the specifics of like the size of your cancer and all of this stuff. It's hard to say, but there definitely are. I can talk about a couple of things. One is that So you're on anastrozole, which is a aromatase inhibitor. There is a new type of medicine. It's also a pill, and it's a drug called a SERD. And there are currently trials looking to see if maybe SERDs are better than anastrozole in patients of your type. Again, congratulations on finishing your breast cancer surgery. I know 49 days out is like you're in that boat where it's been a while, but also, the stuff is all still so much happening. But yes, there are clinical trials for patients such as yourself. Absolutely.
And would you suggest that, again, folks go to the, of course, clinicaltrials.gov and breastcancertrials.org, which is a good friend of ours, to try to find and search, particularly on breastcancertrials.org. They have a very comprehensive search process and method available.
Yeah, absolutely. I think those are both really good resources. But again, I think the easiest way to go about this is to go to your oncologist the next time you see them and say, do you have any clinical trials that are appropriate for me? And if they don't, say, do you mind looking some up? Because they can also look on clinicaltrials.gov and breastcancertrials.org as well if they're not sure. So you should ask them, are there trials for women such as myself? Because they have all your medical history, and they know exactly what boxes you check. And so they can do that well. But breast cancer trials and clinicaltrials.gov are both great resources that are very comprehensive and are pretty easy to use.
Okay, I think we've gotten most of the questions. If I'm missing something, let me know, but I think that we have covered a lot of ground, a lot of good ground, actually, in a short period of time. In the interest of everyone's time, we want to be respectful of that. Dr. Chen or Mrs. Jackson, do you have any comments that you'd like to make before we have Dr. Chen make some of her closing comments?
Well, I think it might be a good idea. The two ladies who had questions for later on, we still have time. So we should have them ask those two questions, and Dr. Chen can think more thoroughly about it, because we have.
I think she wanted to follow up with them because they had specific information about their case, and so she was
Private information.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. I think it might be easier if you want to email some details about what's going on with you to Colleen, then I'm more than happy. I don't know if that's something they want to disclose to everybody on the Zoom.
And I did get Felicia's email, so we
Perfect. Okay. I'm happy to email and kind of figure out what we need to do there.
That'll work then. Okay.
Well, let me just say again, thank you, Dr. Chen, for being here today. We know that you're a busy lady, and to take the time out is really important.
Oh my gosh, Joanne.
It's a Joanne.
Hi. Sorry, someone just commented. I was like, I know Joanne. Hi.
Okay, well, this is wonderful reconnecting. We like that. Well, we adore you. We think that you have just been a great asset to us when we met you in Chicago. We're so grateful for your participation in our Pink Power Tour, which I'll talk about momentarily. I do see one more question from a Stephanie Brown who asked something earlier, but I think it's a good one. She says, I am stage 4 breast cancer. I'm on E+ E positive, P positive, HER2 negative. I'm on Ibersons and letrozole with Lupron injection with a bone fortifier. I was diagnosed in April 2022, still surviving. I think it was more of a comment, and amen to you.
Yeah, congratulations. People can stay with their cancer control for a long time on the Ibrance medicine. And so I'm certainly hoping that that'll be the case. But again, talk to your doctor. If there gets to a time where that's not working as well, talk to your doctor. There are a lot of clinical trials for women such as yourself.
And Ruby Porter is saying, are there any other medications for MBC triple negative than chemotherapy and radiation?
There are a couple options. Sacituzumab is an option, or Trodelvy. All of our drugs have two names just to confuse everyone. Depending on your exact HER2 status, there's a drug called Enhertu that may be an option for you as well. And again, this is an area that is very, very, very active in clinical research. And so there's a lot of avenues if you decide to go that route.
Okay. Well, I thank you again, Dr. Chen. And I see that Mia Galloway, who is a sister of mine, is on here. So thank you, Mia, for taking time out of the ATL to tune in today. Just some give us some closing remarks as we close out the afternoon, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I just, again, wanted to say thank you so much to Colleen, Mrs. Jackson, and the Sisters Network for having me again to talk about such an important topic. Thank you, everyone, for taking time out of your day. I think it's amazing that you are all here taking ownership of your own health. Clinical trials is a really, really important way that we advance medicine. And I think it is incredibly important that Black women have as important of a role as they should in making our science march forward. Talk to your oncologist, make sure there's open communication, ask them lots and lots of questions. I've never, ever, ever minded patients asking me more questions. So please ask them all sorts of questions. Make sure you understand what your options are. Make sure you understand what they're telling you, and best of luck.
Right. And I'd like you, we're going to put up a poll. If you would take a moment and just answer these 4 or 5 questions for us, it helps keep us on track as to what we're providing for you, knowing the knowledge that you have. Just, we would appreciate you taking a moment while we just finish a few housekeeping items for you. Again, Dr. Chen, thank you so much for coming. And we met Dr. Chen at our Pink Power Tour, which many of you have been getting the emails. It's a wonderful initiative that we're going around the country right now just to 5 cities. We kicked it off in Durham, North Carolina, Raleigh, Durham, North Carolina, headed over to Chicago. We'll be going to Dallas on October 29th, November 5th. We'll be in Detroit, Michigan, and then we'll be in Milwaukee, Wisconsin. It's called a Pink Power Tour, a triple negative talk with our sisters. It's a fantastic event. We hope to see you, if you're not in those respective cities, please share that information with your friends and family to have them come and attend. Again, I want to thank our sponsors for today, which were Tahio Oncology and Seagen. These kind of partners that help Sisters Network continue to power the information that we're providing to you ladies across the country and to support our chapters with our Sisters Helping Sisters program and other outreach efforts that Sisters Network Incorporated, the national office, is doing. We need these partners and we value them. And so we thank you again, Tahio Oncology and Seagen, for again, just believing in our organization and supporting the messaging that we need to do. A couple of quick other little housekeeping while you finish up that poll. Let's see. We have some webinars coming up, 2 more. On September 24th, it will be Black Women, Breast Cancer, and Genetic Testing, Know Your Family History. That will be very informative. We've talked about it before, but it'll be a little bit different this time, a little bit more expanded information. So we're excited to offer that information to you again. And then on October 8th, we'll have Understanding